Okay, we have talked about corporations becoming part of the net zero plans, reducing their footprints, sustainability, energy consumption reduction, and so on. Let's just touch a little bit on the financial system as well and investments. Again, a brief introduction from a report by the Network for Greening the Financial System, which consists of lots of central banks and supervisors, as they say on this website, and it's a voluntary effort in terms of tracking the investments, loans, etc. And they give these couple of nice schematics about how we go from physical risks to financial stability risks, because as we know, every time there is a hit on the economy like COVID did, there is a great effort to revive the economies with stimulus funds, and those are not always very mindful about their renewed investments or enhanced investments into systems that are not necessarily climate friendly, for example. Okay, and you can find this kind of information, which I alluded to earlier, on how COVID stimulus funds have gone into mostly regular emission-based investments and activities. So, physical risk drivers like extreme weather events and gradual changes in climate. So there is a change in the background state versus extreme events like heat waves, droughts, floods, cyclones, storm surges, inundation, and so on. So you have here the systems that include economy and direct transmission channels and financial system, and then there are feedbacks from the financial system to the economy and from the economy to the financial system, which are indirect transmission channels both ways. So here you have business disruption, capital scrapping, reconstruction and replacement, increase in commodity prices, and migration, which we have addressed a little bit. That would affect wider economic deterioration in terms of lower demand, productivity losses, and output decreases, impacting financial conditions. The direct transmission channels include lower residential property values, so housing prices collapse. COVID working from home has collapsed the office rental property values, for example. Lower commercial property values, which is what we are talking about. Lower household wealth, so even working from home has affected incomes, childcare, all kinds of cascades happen, and a lot of people lost jobs. Service industry, because of the lockdowns, restaurants closing, bars closing, transportation, travel restrictions obviously led to massive impact on lower income households, for example. Lower corporate profitability and increased litigation as well. And financial system includes financial market losses like equities, bonds, and commodities, credit market losses in residential and corporate loans, underwriting losses, so those are kind of insurance, reinsurance, but not necessarily, but for loans. Operational risk, including liability risk. And this financial system will then feed back through financial contagion like market losses, credit tightening, and so on, that feeds back to economy, affecting again these various components of the economy. So I hope you understand the economy and finance difference, right? So the transition risk to financial stability risks on the slower frequency changes. So transition risk drivers include climate policy, where countries will begin to impose restrictions on emissions, carbon trading, consumption of energy, renewable portfolios, and so on and so forth. Technology transitions, EV will affect a lot of industries and workers. Consumer preferences will change along the way, which will affect economies in terms of stranded assets. So you may have to leave coal in the ground for sure, fossil fuels, real estate, infrastructure, and vehicles. diesel trucks may get completely phased out, for example, and the associated industries. Reinvestment and replacement, increase in energy prices. Sorry, I'm getting a call. Let me pause this for a... Sorry, so I had to stop it because I got a call which was urgent. So transitioning, the transition risk to financial stability risks happens through, as I was stating, climate policies that will become necessary and will be imposed, technology changes that are also necessary and will require adaptation, and consumer preferences will change because bottom-up and top-down rules and regulations to manage climate change risks will begin to play into the game. So we talked about already stranded assets, fossil fuels, real estate infrastructure, reinvestment and replacement, increases in energy prices, which will then feed into the financial system through wider economic deterioration. So lower demand and output, of course, impacting financial conditions. And the direct transmission channels include corporate assets devaluation. So companies that were producing, let's say, climate unfriendly things will begin to have issues, including coal companies and fossil fuel companies. Lower corporate profitability and increased litigation. So it will become, probably already it's happening, where the power plant is sitting and what it is burning and what it is doing to the local air and water, and health effects already playing into these. I think Canada announced the first person that got sick because of climate change, for example. Lower residential property values and lower household wealth. So the financial system issues include financial market losses, so equities, bonds and commodities, credit market losses, residential and corporate loans again, and this will feed back to the economy through financial contagion in terms of market losses, credit tightening, and so on, feeding back to the economy. So this group also suggests a phase space doing scenarios. So the strength of the response based on whether climate targets are met depends on the physical risks, and here the transition risks. So the transition pathways can be orderly or disorderly. So the transition risks will be higher if there is a disorderly transition, and orderly when the transition risks when the transition pathway is orderly. So the targets met, not met, end up in disorderly transition, sudden and unanticipated response, and disruptive but sufficient enough to meet climate goals. So who pays and who doesn't pay the price, equity, justice, and so on become issues. Orderly, we start reducing emissions now in a measured way to meet climate goals. So you put it in the context of all that we have looked at, but that depends on the physical risks. As physical risks increase, the goals, if they are not met, they will be too little, too late. We don't do enough to meet climate goals, like the 2 degrees C or 1.5 degrees C by 2100 with 67% probability, as I always say. The presence of physical risks spurs disorderly transitions. So it will be forced and it will become urgent and it will be disorderly. If the transition is orderly when the goals are not, the climate targets are not met, then we will be in a hot house world. We continue to increase emissions, doing very little, if anything, to avert physical risks. So we are here now in the low transition risk, but physical risks are very, very high. So there is no getting away from this. So increase in climate related claims in the 1.5 degrees C and 3.5 degrees C scenarios estimated from this kind of phase space. Estimated climate related claims burden as a proportion of premiums in 2016. Let's say homeowners insurance policies in euros, millions of euros. So total premiums, which include other costs and profit margins, claims, not climate related claims, and climate related claims. So the fraction of climate-related claims in terms of rain, hail, and storm would increase, and so that's the 1.5 and 3.5 degree scenarios. Just keep these things in mind, how the system will get affected through various tools, levers, mechanisms, and so on. Estimated climate-related claims burden in 2085, homeowners insurance policies in millions of euros. For 3.5 degrees C, you would have increases from 2016 to be 25% for climate-related claims burden in 2085 in the lower estimate, so 513 million euros for these three events, climate events, and higher estimate goes to 131%, so more than 100% increase with respect to the baseline in 2016, with significant increase coming from storms here. Okay, so gives you a sense of the kind of details one has to worry about for transitioning the finance system to a greener system. There is also now a theme called impact investments. You can read on this web page here. Impact investments are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. So right now there's a lot of movement towards divesting from fossil fuels, for example. So these kind of things will force fossil fuel companies towards carbon capture and sequestration, or towards more renewable energies, bioenergy, and so on. Okay, so leaving the assets stranded in the ground. Coal is already being forced because of its enormous impact on air quality and health, and it's becoming economically unviable to dig it up, so that'll get phased out at some point. But fossil fuels are still the most used energy source, so that's going to take time. So leaving those stranded in the ground is going to require incredible game changers in solar and wind and battery storage and so on, right? And nuclear fusion, for example. So that's the idea of impact investments, and there are numbers being already put out in terms of portfolios that are full of impact investments, and investment firms reporting profits and growing investments, people conscientiously investing in this direction of making as a co-benefit, generating positive, measurable social and environmental impacts from their investments in addition to making money. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction, so let's leave it here.